Hello, everybody. It's the Paddock Pass podcast coming to you a couple of days after the San Marino GP. I'm Neil, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by David Emmett, as always, and we are going to go through some of the big discussion points from the Misano GP, including some of your Patreon questions. So thanks very much for getting in touch with us on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast and sending in some interesting questions, which we'll tackle towards the end of the show. I am glad to say that I am back in the comfy confines of my apartment in Barcelona. But Dave, you seem to be out on the road somewhere. Where are you?
I am in a lay-by just south of Bologna, next to the legendary SS65 Passo della Futa road, which is where Ducati tests its road bikes. Where if they can handle the Passo della Futa, then they get the stamp of approval and they're good enough to sell to the general public. And it's a lovely road. I mean, it's a fantastic road. I've done it on the car, in a car. I've done it on a bike. There's some lovely scenery up there, and it drops down to Mugello. I will, if I've got the time to spare for Mugello, I'll actually take that road rather than the motorway going from Bologna.
Should our listeners be slightly concerned by the fact you're spending your afternoons hanging out in laybys?
I mean, one has to find one's income where one can as a freelancer. Neil, you know this.
No comment on that one, Dave. But all I can say is I don't envy your trip to Bologna Airport coming up. I was stuck there for 3 hours yesterday with the delay. And I don't know if there's maybe a worse place to be after a delay, but certainly the departures lounge is, I mean, you're packed in there like sardines. It kind of reminded me of that Hieronymus Bosch painting that you like so much. Is it the Garden of Earthly Pleasures?
The Garden of Earthly Delights. It's a very fine painting. It's in the, what's the big thing in Madrid? The Prado. Yes, exactly. It's magnificent, and you should go and see it if you're there. But yeah, I still think that Bologna Airport is better than Eindhoven Airport, because you've never been there. I know this. You've told me this when you mentioned it before. But it is an absolute hell on earth.
Okay, I'll take your word on that, Dave. And if it's worse than Bologna, then I'll be staying clear of Eindhoven, I think, in years to come. Dave, you're obviously on the road in Italy because you stayed around for the test yesterday. There was the one-day post-race test at Misano. It was a chance for all 5 MotoGP factories to try some things for 2025. Some factories were going big on their efforts for 2025, and others were testing minor items or parts for that. But I mean, what was interesting from what you could see?
I mean, there was a lot of interesting things to be seen. There was, for example, I mean, you divide the Misano test up into several different sort of parts, really. They are working for, I mean, especially because we've got Misano 2 coming up in a couple of weeks. So there's some people are working for, people doing work for Misano 2, refining the setup, addressing the problems they found during Misano 1. We also have the issue of the rest of the season. So we've got riders working to work on some of the bits and pieces that they've the problems they've had for the rest of the season, especially riders who are leaving their team. So, for example, we saw Aprilia, Maverick, and Aleix working on braking because that's a big problem for them. But obviously, they didn't go anywhere near the 2025 bike because they're just not going to be there. We also saw the very first bits and pieces of the 2025 bikes. Yamaha bought another engine. I think they're on, I don't know if they're somewhere between 4 and 6 engines for the season so far. It's actually, quite interesting what they're doing because they are working so hard at it. They've had one 2025 engine which they've used. They've got another one. Alex Rins and Fabio Quattro both liked it. They did say it was very much the first sort of attempt at it. It was also it had a more direct connection It sounded different as well. I mean, I was down in pit lane, and it really did sound an awful lot different to some of the other engines they've used. We saw Ducati. I mean, like, so for example, Marc Marquez, he's not going to be a factory rider until 2025, and so he was just working on setup for the rest of the season. We saw KTM, obviously, Augusto and Jack, while leaving at the end of the year, so they just had one session each basically, and they were working on setup. Pedro Acosta and Brad Binder got very busy doing lots and lots of things, including work on Paul's bike, which has a different, it has a different engine. It sounds different. It feels different. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Everyone is working on aero. Ducati, Bagnaia was working on electronics. He said basically the electronics that he's been working on are going to be the basis of the GP25. It's going to be the basis of the bike for next year. So yes, that's going to be very interesting to see what he can do with that. Let's see. Honda continue to be sort of a bit lost. They had an aero package which actually works quite well. There was a lot of that really gave the bike a little bit of turning, but really Honda's biggest problem is drive out of corners. Pecco Bagnaia said he was following during the tyre test, he was trying to follow Joan Mir, but he came out of turn 6 and he opened the throttle and he just accelerated straight past him, which really or really shows exactly what the Honda's problem is. They just haven't got any acceleration, despite the fact that they are quite high in the top speed in the top speed charts. Joan Mir was quite disappointed by the amount of bits and pieces that Honda had brought. He'd been expecting more, perhaps because of last year. Last year, Honda bought a completely new bike, and they'd bought a completely new bike the year before. And so, he'd been hoping for a bit more, and this isn't going to fix anything, or it's not going to fix their biggest problem. So, yeah, he was a little bit worried.
Yeah, difficult times still for Honda. Dave, one of the more interesting things I was thinking of at the test was just KTM and the fact that Binder and Acosta were going to be trying the kind of bike that Paul Espargaro has been wildcarding in his last 2 GP appearances in Austria and Misano. I heard yesterday Binder saying that it was ridiculous how different the bike is in terms of how it needs to be ridden. It seems as though it will require quite a bit of a different approach in terms of riding style. How did they get on?
Well, one of the problems that KTM had was because there was the 2 of them, they didn't really have time to sit down and think about it. We asked Pedro, so what was the new bike like? And he said, do you know what? I can't remember. I had so many different things to test. I think Brad said, we spoke to Brad in the morning before he'd had a proper chance to have a go. He did say that he'd tried the bike and it did feel very different, and he was going to take some adapting. But it was genuinely very busy. KTM weren't quite as busy as Aprilia because, Raul Fernandez is the only Aprilia rider going to be left there. So he said he didn't go out on the same bike. He didn't go out on the same bike for any 2 runs. It kept on changing because he had so much to do.
Yeah, this episode of the Paddock Pass podcast is obviously brought to you by Renthal Street, KTM and Fly Racing, and we would like to thank our sponsors for keeping this show very much on the road. Very much worth checking out all 3 of those companies for their fantastic motorcycle-related products on the market. Dave, just moving on a little to one of the other interesting things from the test yesterday. It was mandatory for every MotoGP rider to try Michelin's new front tyre that they brought to the test. Obviously, a lot has been made of this front tyre. Front tire pressures and potential penalties have been a story in MotoGP for the last year and a half. We know that we need a new front tire in MotoGP. The demands of the aerodynamics and devices on the bikes currently are putting way too much load onto the front tire, and it's causing a lot of riders difficulties, especially when they're trying to overtake. So where are there positives in this regard?
Yeah, I think there definitely were positives. It was. I mean, the reception was a bit mixed. There were riders who didn't like it and riders who did like it. Everyone said that it was better in a straight line, and it actually turned better, and it had a lot more grip. That was very positive for everyone. The trouble is, because it had a lot more grip, that actually made, in certain phases of the turning, made it quite difficult. Marco Bezzecchi was saying what he didn't like was on trail braking, holding the brakes on. It was difficult to actually tip the bike in. That he found very, very difficult. Ironically, Pecco Bagnaia absolutely loved it. He said it was exactly what he needed. It was just what he was missing. He brakes very late and very hard, and because of that, he could actually get the thing turned and get it into the corner. Everyone said, once it was turning, it would just sort of keel over and give loads of grip. So yeah, it was very, very positive. But it was a 30-minute session. Riders, I think the rider who got the most laps only got about 12 laps on it, which is a lot. Well, it's not a lot when you're developing something like a front tyre, because the front tyre is the front tyre is the main means of communication between the rider's brain and the tarmac. The front tyre is everything, and even the smallest change to a front tyre can completely mess with riders' heads. I think that this will Michelin have done their best to change the tyre, but yet still keep it as sort of within the normal setup window as possible. The bikes will need to be adapted. They won't have to be completely redesigned in the way that we saw that from Bridgestone to Michelin. But yeah, it was very interesting seeing who liked it and who didn't, and all the rest of it. But it is, I think it's going to be an improvement. But it was very hard to tell because, you have to get to a race and sit behind someone for 20 laps.
Yeah, exactly. And we also are yet to completely understand whether this will be ready for 2025. Do you think it will?
That was sort of what I understood. Michelin said afterwards, Piero Taramasso sent us a statement afterwards, and he sort of said, we haven't got very much time. We've still got to make a few changes. So you'd expect to see it at the Valencia test, and then maybe from the very start at Sepang. But testing is going to be a bit strange next year for the pre-season, because we're going to go to Sepang and then we're going to go to Buriram, which are both very, very hot races, very, very hot temperatures. It'll certainly see how it stands up to the conditions, but it's going to be sort of a bit strange to actually make some back-to-back or to make a comparison and to understand how things are going to change.
Yeah, and just our final takeaway from the test, Dave, it's something that we said we were going to discuss a little bit more in detail on this show after our reaction show on Sunday. And that was, of course, the fact that riders are now testing communication with the race direction and also with the team. It's believed that this is something that Dorna are trying to push through to be ready for 2025. How was the test for that side of things? And then we'll go on to whether we think it's a good thing or not just afterwards. But, yesterday, was there generally positive feedback about the technical side of it, the logistical side of it?
Again, it was very split. Generally, because the system is people won't be using custom earplugs. I have custom earplugs made for which I use on a motorcycle. I think that's also a system which they use in Formula One, where they're using custom earplugs with a speaker in it. They're not going to be using that in MotoGP, and also in part also because of the way. It's something extra to make sure that you've got everything in and fitted before you go on. A lot of riders don't like those sort of custom earplugs. They prefer the foam earplugs. So it's going to be a bone conduction thing, which I'm sure readers or listeners and viewers will be familiar with these things, where you there are certain bone conduction headphones where the speaker actually sits on the bone behind your ear and transmits the noise directly into your inner ear that way. That is quite uncomfortable, was the general perception. But some were, I think, there's going to be 3 stages from there was a story on motorsport.com explaining that there's going to be 3 stages. The first will be race direction to riders one way, then 2-way between riders and race direction, with potentially going to 2-way communication, including the teams. There's no date for that yet. It looks like we're going to be doing race direction, 1-way race direction to riders sometime next year, and then by the end of next year, or maybe 26, we'll go 2-way communication. That communication between race direction and riders, that people were generally very positive about that. As a rule, because of the safety aspect. There were a few concerns about having something pressing against your skull while you've got the helmet on. If you have a big crash and you've got something hard in there, is there a potential to cause severe damage? Dorna are generally pretty good about the kit that they make and the way that they build things with sort of certain amount of safety in there. So I think I understand the fear, but I think there's reason to believe that it'll be sort of okay. But in terms of communication between the teams and riders, it was really mixed. My favourite was Pedro Acosta, who says it's the only time I get to myself. I don't want people shouting at me. He says it's saving me money on a mental coach, which I like. But yeah, like Aleix loved the idea. Pedro hated it. Bagnaia hated it. It was very, very mixed.
Yeah, I think Quartararo was another one who was a fan of it. I guess there's 2 ways to look at it. There's one which is that one of the beauties of motorcycle racing is that you put the visor down, put the helmet on, and you're pretty much on your own. And no matter how much prep and how much influence your team have had on you over the weekend and how they've prepped you, it's pretty much down to what you can do over a race distance, over 25 or 26 laps, which is a fantastic thing. But then there's also the aspect that this can provide hashtag content. It can be potentially a funny thing. It can be a lighthearted aspect of the sport that might attract and appeal to younger viewers. So where do you sit? I mean, I know where you sit.
You know exactly where I sit, Neil. Yes, where I sit
on the fence, isn't it?
No, definitely
it's an
not.
Italian lay-by at the moment, actually.
Yes, exactly. I'm sitting in an Italian lay-by. No, I would like to see 2-way communications between rider and teams nuked from space. I think it's the worst idea ever. I mean, I'm just about sort of settled to the idea that teams can communicate. Can send messages to the dashboard, rider X behind you, mapping B, or in the case, what was it, mapping 8 for Jorge Lorenzo. I mean, I think it's a terrible idea precisely because of what you said, Neil. It's and precisely because of what Pedro Acosta said. It's between you work as a team towards getting the bike on the grid, and as soon as the lights go out, that's it. It's up to the rider to bring to fruition the work of all of the team. Yes, it might well provide some hashtag content, but I think it's going to be. It's not the kind of. I mean, you need that kind of hashtag content in F1 because F1 is absolutely awful. It's the only thing that's actually interesting. But I think that MotoGP is quite a fun sport already. So, yes, I don't think it needs it. I think there's also going to be, I also think the amount of hashtag content we're going to get is quite limited because it's, MotoGP bikes are 130 decibels, or well, that's the maximum noise at 5,500 RPM, which is basically just off idle. They're doing 350 kilometers an hour. They're really, really engaged in certain sections. Fabio Quartararo said, "Look, for God's sake, don't talk to me through sector 3, which is through Corvone and all that fast bit. But you can talk to me elsewhere." So yeah, there's. I don't think there's going to be that much communication anyway.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things also is that obviously it seems as though the majority of business and discussion in F1 is conducted in English, whereas in MotoGP we've seen that it's anything but. It's Spanish and Italian, I mean a lot of the engineers from certain teams don't maybe have a great grasp of English, and for a rider to sort of reply, okay, a lot of them speak very good English indeed, but for them to kind of reply in a second language or a third language might not be as easy or as natural as it would be in their first.
Especially doing 350 kilometers an hour through, up the main straight towards the end of the Strait of Magellan.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the language thing as well, because they've tried to put a camera into the room just next to the podium, and the riders are given a bit of a chance to watch the highlights of the race and basically talk amongst themselves, and we get to listen in. But the majority of the time they're just speaking in Italian. I think they tried to make them do it in English and then just give up after a few rounds, because when it's three Italians sat together, it's kind of, the idea is slightly ridiculous to try and do that. So that's something they would have to figure out, I think, for the communication.
Yes, exactly. I think it is true that there are some teams try to force their riders, or when they're speaking to the chief mechanic when they come in for the debrief, they'll speak in English. In part because there'll be a Michelin tech there, and there'll be an Öhlins tech, and there'll be other people in different languages as well. So that they want to keep it to a single language, especially, for example, for the Japanese factories. But if you're Enea Bastianini with an Italian crew chief in the factory Ducati team, you're not going to be trying to think of how to say something specific in English while you're hooning through Hoogheide at Assen. You're just going to be bellowing something in Italian and hoping that that your crew chief can understand it.
Yeah, which might start with fa and end in culo, if I'm not mistaken.
There is a non-zero chance that that sort of language. I mean, that would. I suppose the most entertaining thing would be, the number of beeps per race, sort of thing. I think we could open a whole new fantasy league.
Exactly.
It was actually. That did actually get asked. There were a few people asking. So, do you actually speak to yourself? Talk to yourself while you are while you're riding? And the most interesting thing was a lot of riders didn't even really know. They weren't sure whether they spoke to themselves or not. So, I suppose that would be the one entertaining justification. I would pay money to listen to what they're saying to themselves, but I have no interest in them communicating with their teams.
Yeah, one of my favorite comments was Fabio Quartararo was saying they would have to speak to me in the braking zone, because that's where I don't breathe. I hold my breath when I'm going into braking. I think just how treacherous is it on the Yamaha trying to stay with the bikes ahead, if that's his technique.
This is also the difference between F1 and MotoGP. Riding a motorcycle is incredibly physical. Anyone who's done it knows that it's something that you do with your entire body. That's what I love about motorcycling, and it's much more physically demanding than sitting in a car. Sitting in a car, you're controlling it with your hands, and yes, you're subject to severe G forces because of braking and cornering and all the rest of it. But it's just in no way comparable, because you're not hanging off the thing trying to get it through the corner.
Yeah, exactly. I was rewatching a race recently, and they had that live heart rate indicator on it, and it was, in fact, I think it was after the Aragon race, Aleix Espargaro posted his heart readings throughout that, and it was somewhere around 180 to 190 BPM for the majority of the race. So, I mean, you're not really going to be in much state to actually speak when your heart is beating that fast. And I guess one other thing I wanted to say is people were asked, I think it was probably you actually that was putting the point quite forcefully to a lot of the riders yesterday, that one of the joys of
might have been a little bit forceful.
Yeah, not like you to kind of wield your opinion on someone and force them to adopt it, but it did seem as though some of the feedback was quite interesting regarding Sunday's race. Would Jorge Martin have made that same mistake if someone was in his ear saying, look, this is what's going to happen. The rain's going to stop here. And a lot of the riders are saying, hey, it wouldn't have made any difference because whoever's in the garage, they don't know what it's doing out in the track. They don't know exactly what the conditions are like. So they didn't feel that would have impacted that particular moment. But that is one of the joys of MotoGP, isn't it? That in those kind of conditions, it's absolutely down to the rider. Yeah, they'll maybe get some signaling and some prep work from the team, but it's in the moment, it's pretty much up to them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. There are fewer and fewer moments for riders to actually make mistakes. For example, at the start, they practice their starts so that the engineers have got all the data, so that to get the launch control dead right. Then they've locked down the rear ride height device. They've locked down the front ride height device. They've got launch control engaged. There is still a lot of skill involved. The skill is mostly in modulating the clutch in the bit between gripping and then releasing it to get it to drive, as we saw with Pecco Bagnaia in the at the start of the sprint race at Misano. But this is, it's another one of those things where you're taking away the skill from the rider and the decision making from the rider. I think. The whole Martin thing, it is a really interesting question. Would he still have pitted? Because the track was wet, and especially around that last section of the track was absolutely soaking. Whereas down sort of the first sector, it was much, and the second sector, it was much drier. But he might have asked first, should I come in? What's the rain going to do? But yeah, it's I'm still mortally opposed to it, but it was interesting listening to what the riders had to say about it.
Yeah, for my own opinion, I think when this idea, it has been floated a couple of times in previous years. I seem to remember when it first got tested at one of the Misano tests, a lot of people were getting stuck in on social media and saying, oh, this is a terrible idea. And to be honest, we thought dashboard messaging was going to be a terrible idea. And it's proved to be something that's quite interesting. You can get quite a lot of information from what teams are communicating to a rider in certain points from that. And you don't really feel that riders being told to switch to a different map, for example, on their dashboard is really interfering too much in terms of what teams are telling them to do. And maybe I'm thinking, think more in terms of what a random punter would want to see than someone who has been watching maybe the sport for 30 years and has their own kind of ideas cemented. There is no doubt that in F1 it has added a kind of another aspect to things, and say what you like about it, but it has been very successful at attracting a new fan set. And I'm sort of thinking maybe just go with a more of an open mind. I do have massive thoughts about it, which are quite negative, but I'm also trying to be slightly open-minded and think, well, maybe it could bring some interesting dynamics to watching a race. A lot of things to iron out.
I'm 60. I don't have to have an open mind anymore. I'm getting close to my pension. I'm supposed to be here completely closed-minded and not aware of any. The opinions I have formed in 1993 are good enough for the rest of my existence. No, it's a fair point. I think
so. Case closed.
I think in terms of dashboard messages, it's an interesting one, but also the list of dashboard messages is very, very limited. They're only allowed, they're all pre-approved. There's a list of things they can send, and also just the amount of space that you have on there is not very much. And riders generally don't. They do look at their dashboard much more than we're aware, but they're much more like, it's much easier to. You've had text messages from people that you've seen but decided not to respond to, Neil. I currently have something
mostly
like 5. Yeah, mostly. I have 5,000 unread emails, so that's exactly what I think about sending text messages. But it's different when it's someone shouting in your ears. The difference between getting a text message and someone actually having the temerity to call you on your telephone.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that's a big no-no from me. Calling someone on the telephone. Who does that these days?
Exactly.
Also, I think just sometimes we're sort of we're maybe complaining about the fact that MotoGP isn't attracting younger fans, and we go to certain races in certain countries, and the sort of demographics of people in the grandstands are a little older,
Yeah.
and maybe more males than females. I think you have to bear in mind that with the younger generation, TikTok is a big thing. Things that are nice little 15, 20-second sound bites are a massive, massive thing in terms of how to kind of reach younger people. And whether you like it or not, I think the radio system in F1 has definitely managed to do that, especially on like a Friday when they're just out practicing and maybe there's not that much else going on that the casual fan could see, whereas this can kind of provide a bit of entertainment. So I can understand why they're doing it.
Do you know what? I wouldn't even find it. I wouldn't be that much opposed to if it was just for Friday practice. That sort of thing, I think, might actually be quite good. Again, it would be. I can see. Gosh, I'm changing my mind. How dare I? I'm too old for this nonsense. Anyway, I can see on Friday when you're doing qualifying, for example, such and such is behind you, arranging when to when to leave the pits, that sort of thing. That would be very interesting. You get an insight a little bit into strategy and into tactics. But for me, leave it out of the race. Like I want to, when the lights go out, that's it. They're on their own. But I can see all the way up to maybe even qualifying. I'm not sure. There'd be a case to have it then, because then that adds. Well, you've had to commentate on Moto2 FP2, Neil. You know that sometimes there's not an awful lot happening, and you're having to sort of fill in. Whereas if there's a little bit of sort of chatter backwards and forwards, going out now, not going out now, you might learn more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So interesting, Dave, and I think I might have just changed your mind on the entire topic, but I don't want to seem too satisfied with myself. But that sounded like a man who was coming, maybe not 180, but let's say 90 degrees, and with further contemplation might be won over by this new concept. That's it for the first part of this show. We're going to now move into the section where we answer some of your questions that you've asked us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast. Sign up and become a member there, and you can actually interact and ask us some questions that we will then delve into on our race discussion show on a Wednesday after a race. We also asked everyone on our Patreon page to vote for the rider of the day from the San Marino GP. I guess it's not really much of a surprise that for the second week in succession, Marc Marquez took the majority of the vote. 73% said that he was the rider of the day, and an honourable mention also for Angel Piqueras, the winner of the Moto3 race, who managed to get 17% of the votes. So that was quite interesting. And we also asked our patrons to comment on Jorge Martin's pit decision, whether it was insanity or whether it was just a simple mistake. And a lot of our patrons managed to give some very measured responses, I would have to say. Dutsy, for example, said if it rains for another 5 minutes, it's a masterstroke. Paul McMullen added, it was a tough call, but I don't fault them. Hindsight is a 2020 thing. And Aaron, I particularly like this comment. MotoGP is a sport of split-second decisions, and while 99% is skill and planning, that 1% can be what it takes. If it worked, he's a genius, but the key for the championship is how he reacts at the next round and shows resilience. So I think that's a pretty fair assessment right there. Dave, anything to add? I know we talked about this on Sunday, but
yeah, I think also someone on Discord made a really good point about because I was when Pecco crashed with Alex, we were saying, look, that was impatience. He didn't need to do that. He could have just waited. And someone said, yeah, but like the opportunity presented itself, and he had to make a split-second decision. So you're criticising him for that, and saying, look, he could have known beforehand. On the other hand, we're criticising Jorge Martin for making this split-second decision to go into the pits, because I think that was I said that on the Sunday show, and that's a very valid point. I think it's slightly different because when you're actually chasing someone, you've got this. You're waiting for the moment to pounce, so you know that it's going to happen. You can see it happening. You're sort of hyper aware of exactly of all of the various sort of combinations. Flag to flag races are very, very rare. You've Everything is strange all of a sudden. The grip is strange. Everything is different. And so I think your riders are much further out of their comfort zones. And that's why I think it's a different kind of, sudden decision. They're having to make a decision which is going to affect the rest of the race sort of in a heartbeat, with no prior sort of data to go on. They just have to sort of go by feeling. Does it smell like it's going to rain? Does it feel? What color is the sky? What's the rest of the track going to be? So it's just it's a really interesting one. I love that. One of the things I like about the Discord, and please people sign up patreon.com/paddockpasspodcast, because the Discord is really good. We get a chance to interact with fans, and people have got really good ideas. And so, like, that one made me sit down and think about it and think, yeah, it's similar. Maybe we were a bit too harsh on Pecco for making the split second decision. Maybe we are being a bit or not being harsh enough for Jorge Martin. But yeah, it's a really tricky one. It's much as ever, as I sit here in my car in a lay-by in Italy. It's very easy for me to pontificate, but I think it's very different when you're on the bike and there's so much at stake.
Yeah, there's no better place for a bit of quiet contemplation about how you've ended up where you are in your life than when you're sitting in a lay-by on a Tuesday afternoon. I absolutely would concur with that, Dave. Just one other comment from one of our patrons, DJ Purchase. Shout out to DJ, saying riders were crashing, so it seemed sensible at the time, but he should have just stuck with Pecco. I think that is something you can get behind 100%. Dave, a few questions.
It's what Jorge said himself. So yeah, can't disagree.
Brian Deere asks, Dave, would Marc still have won if Jorge didn't shit the bed?
Yes, I think so, because of the conditions. Jorge Martin is not as good in those conditions. I mean, the conditions came to Marc, and then it dried out, and then it was sort of more of a more equal race. It would have been really interesting. It would have been a really interesting race in that case, because then you would have, for a start, Marc would have had to get past both Pecco and Jorge, and then what do Jorge and Pecco do? How do they look at each other? I actually think that Marc's winning margin might have been even bigger, because Pecco and Marc, or Pecco and Jorge, would have been looking much more at each other rather than what Marc is doing. With Martin out of the equation, I think it gave Pecco a bit more freedom to try to win the race, and certainly more desire to win the race. So yeah, it's interesting. What do you think, Neil?
I kind of think maybe the opposite to you, because to me, this was probably the best situation that could have happened to Marc. Obviously, the rain allowed him to climb, 5 positions in one lap just after Martin pitted, which is obviously a sizable turnaround for him. But then after that, I kind of felt he was in the best situation possible, because Pecco was probably not letting on just how much physical discomfort he was in. I know he said the last 4 or 5 laps, when he knew that the game was up, then he sort of lost his focus, and that's when everything started to hurt a bit more. But when you looked at Pecco in Parc Ferme, I mean, the guy couldn't even move his neck at all. He was sort of like a robot, the way he was turning his body from left to right. And you think, well, he was obviously, I think, trying to put a brave face on it. And I think Martin, as he had demonstrated in the sprint on Saturday, was pretty much fast right the way through the race, and was even more comfortable on the medium rear tire, which they were all on for Sunday's race. So I think Martin would have definitely given Marc a hard time. Maybe even beaten him if he hadn't made that mistake. And that's another reason why I think it was such a massive missed opportunity, because Pecco on that instance was there for the taking at Misano. Dave, just another question. This is in from VJ. Was this Martin's Phillip Island 2013 moment?
I love this question, and the answer is no, but for different reasons. The 2013 moment was not an accident; it was a plan. The team Marc, his manager Emilio Alzamora, they'd all completely misread and misunderstood the results. They were trying to be too clever. The rules. They were trying to be too clever. They had a plan. They executed the plan. They found out that they had misread the rules and were punished for it. So, like, I get the question, and it's a fun one, but I disagree.
Okay. And we have one other thing on Marc. This one came in from Morgan. He said, on track, Marc is ruthless, but he seems to take care of his team and value them. How much will Grassini miss this leadership when he leaves?
I mean, the Grassini team is already like a family team, which is one of the reasons why I think Alex Marquez is doing so well there. So they will miss it a little bit, but I mean, it does touch on a really good point. What Marc is so good at, and we saw the same with when he was in the Repsol Honda team. I mean, for a long time, up until 2015, Marc didn't even have his own motorhome. He just slept in the GP rooms. Because he basically spent all of his time in the garage with his crew. He's really, really good at building a team, building a group, building that sort of like that sense of fellowship, which is what in a difficult situation, that's an investment you make, and in difficult situations when you need your guys to do, your people to go the extra yard for you, to stay up until 2:00 fixing your bike or looking for the solution in the electronics, they're willing to do that because they're as invested in you, or you've proved to them that you are invested in them, and that's when they start paying it back. This is what all the truly great champions did. Valentino Rossi was the same. He was very, very good with his crew. Marquez is the same. Stoner slightly less so, but he still had a really close relationship with his crew chief. There are all of these. Building. It's interesting also seeing Pedro Acosta. I remember going down to Aragon when Acosta was still in Moto2 and seeing him sitting on his bike, just chatting to his crew, and you're thinking, okay, the boy understands what teamwork means, how to get the best out of everyone. He's a natural leader. So, will Grassini miss his leadership? I think a little bit. Grassini will still do. It's a really close-knit team, so they're going. They don't need the leadership in the same way that some other teams do. Yes, they will miss it a little bit, but they're going to be fine. But I think it really does highlight the importance of a figure of being able to build a team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Marc's, there's been a few videos that MotoGP have posted, those behind the scenes videos that they post after a race. I think it was back in Jerez when he was on the podium, and he was doing a little sing song for the entire team afterwards, and basically talking about how great they are in Italian with his brother. And little moments like that, I think, bring everyone together. And as you said, Marc's always been an absolute master of that. Moving on to some questions that aren't about Marc or about the Jorge Martin incident. I think I can maybe answer this one because this is from Yanni, or Gianni. Apologies if I've mispronounced your name. But is there more going on with Sergio Garcia than getting snubbed by MotoGP teams in his perspective? It's an interesting question, and I actually went and spoke to a couple of Spanish journalists, Borja Gonzalez, who's been on our show before, Mela Chircolas as well, just about this, because it does seem as though there's more than meets the eye. And obviously we heard from the team, I think it's the team principal down at MT Helmets MSI back at Aragon, Albert Vadri, who told us that it was the fact that Sergio was passed over for the MotoGP seat in Pramac Yamaha that has kind of led to some issues with him, and he's obviously struggling to accept that decision. Apparently, according to the two journalists I mentioned, Sergio didn't really take too kindly to that. He was he felt quite snubbed and quite let down that that comment came out of the team, and he has pointed to the fact that actually his qualifying crash in Aragon banged his shoulder. I think it was his right shoulder quite badly, which then caused him to retire from the race. And then he had a massive crash at the end of free practice on Friday morning at Misano. And that really gave his other shoulder a massive whack. So Sergio was not in fantastic trim, I think it's safe to say, on Saturday and Sunday at Misano. And I think he feels slightly let down by the team in that they've come out and said something like that, to indicate that, he's having some real emotional and kind of mental issues. So, I think there's the injury is one thing. I think a little bit of annoyance at the team is another. And then you have to imagine that the disappointment of missing the MotoGP seat when it did seem as though it was within his grasp is maybe having another impact as well, even if Sergio doesn't want to admit that.
No, I mean I agree, especially about the fact that his team manager goes on live TV and says, "Yeah, our rider's a bit of a soft lad, really. He's lost it. It's his head's completely gone. This is not really how you motivate it. I mean, and also it's a little bit about the way that you bring this sort of information. There's better ways of wording it. So." I mean, you know far better than I do, but yeah, there's in general, whenever you think there is something, like one particular incident has affected a rider, it's never one particular incident. There's usually a lot more going on. Riders are always carrying some kind of injury. If they have a crash, and they'll pretend that they're perfectly fine and there's nothing going on and nothing's hurting, and then you find out sort of like later that they've broken several bones. So yeah, it's not surprising.
Yeah. Shout out also, we didn't really mention on Sunday's show, but shout out to his teammate Aigura as well, winning 3 weeks after breaking three bones in his hand and taking the championship lead for the first time. And in my opinion, that's probably, I can't really see anyone else retaking the lead from Aigura, because if he's managed to actually catch Garcia, reel him in with a broken hand, then can you imagine what it will be like when we go to the flyaways, which is his kind of part of the season. So great stuff from Aigura in Moto2. This is coming in from Scott Rowe. He asks about the final lap of the Moto3 race, Dave. When Angel Piqueras ran it deep on the final lap, then cut the nose off his followers, forcing them to touch the brake, which allowed him to make the winning gap. Was that a mistake or was that racecraft?
I'm going to leave this to you, Neil, because you were paying much more attention. I was trying to watch the World Superbike Superpole race, so it's up to you.
Well, I have to be honest, I'm not exactly sure. I asked Angel a few questions after the race, but one of them wasn't about that. There certainly were a few moments on the final lap when he looked absolutely out of control, and it looked as though he was going to T-bone, I think it was David Alonso down into turn 14 on the penultimate lap, but managed just about to avoid him. But I'm not sure whether he kind of brake checked someone on that final lap or whether it was just a mistake from him pushing on. But one thing I did love, I was writing a little bit about this for Motorcycle News, and I was listening to Angel's comments in the press conference, and then I was listening to his comments that he made to Spanish TV, and he said basically, I got to the lead group, I sort of thought, okay, I'm here, and then he was like, I think he said, fuck it, I'm either going to crash out or I'm going to win this. They're either going to die or I'm going to be standing on the top step of the podium. So it sounded as though once he got to that lead group, it was like, I'm knocking all of these guys out of the way, or I'm winning trying, basically. So shout out to Piqueras for doing that. And I was speaking to Matt Dunn, who covered Piqueras in the Red Bull Rookies Cup last year, and he said even when he won a race in the Rookies Cup, he won 9 of them last year, he said he never really gave the impression that he was that happy or that joyous, because for him it was just, I should be here, I should be winning this championship easily, and this is just the step to where I really want to be, which is the World Championship. So apparently Piqueras' reaction to winning that race was 2 or 3 times more excited than he ever looked in the Rookies Cup, and I think that's kind of telling as well. He's got this kind of calm, quiet assurance about him, which belies the fact that he's 17 years old. And sometimes you do see that with the kind of the very best riders that are destined for big things at such a young age.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we saw it with Pedro Acosta, who just looks so calm and so grown up. Like literally every interview with him at the start of the season was, gosh, this young man is so mature for his age. It's like talking to a 40-year-old. So it's definitely one of those signs that someone has got his head screwed on right.
Yeah, absolutely. Final question, Dave. This is from DJ. I'm not sure if that's DJ Purchase or just DJ, but thinking about the passport dilemma and how riders from Spain or Italy may not get a GP ride in the future. I think he's referring to Sergio Garcia and the fact that Dorna made it quite clear that they didn't want any more Spaniards in the Premier class at the expense of other nationalities. He said, how long do you all think this freeze will hold? And if it's more than a year, won't it create a massive logjam in Moto 2 and Moto 3, exacerbating the problem?
That's a very good question. I mean, these sort of log jams always last until an exceptional talent is going to sort of turns up. So basically, it'll be you'll see another year perhaps of people not wanting Spanish riders in MotoGP, and then all of a sudden David Alonso will be ready to step up to MotoGP, even though he's technically a Colombian. It'll be no, please, you come in. So it's also related to talent. But it is much harder for Spaniards because you do have to be an exceptional talent to be able to get through, because there are so many just really good Spaniards already in MotoGP. I think Fermín Aldeguer got a little bit lucky signing his contract so early before it became clear that things were a bit more difficult. But yes, I mean, this is something. I think this is one area where we will see the influence of Liberty in the coming years, where they're trying to make a more diverse grid, a more non-Spanish and non-Italian grid. But yeah, I mean, it's always difficult. To me, you have some just riders who are exceptional. I mean, the Marc Marquezes, the Pedro Acostas, the Fabio Quartararos, the Pecco Bagnaias. They deserve to be there regardless of their nationality. And you've got sort of a layer beneath that, should we say, the Enea Bastianinis, Alex Rins, Joan Mir. Are they special? How special are they? It's really, really, really difficult to say. Or the Maverick Vinales. Maverick is just absolutely astonishingly talented. It's just that the stars have to align for it to come out. And then you've got sort of a whole bunch of people who are just really, really good. Maybe Marco Bezzecchi, maybe even Aleix Espargaro. You could say there's a group of riders who are very good. Alex Marquez, double world champion, no doubt about his quality. But if you have to choose between sort of Alex Marquez and someone of a similar level of a different nationality, you would probably choose one from a different nationality, because we need different nationalities in the championship. That doesn't mean that Alex Marquez doesn't deserve his spot in MotoGP. He absolutely deserves his spot. But Alex Marquez is not going to win a MotoGP championship, unlike his brother. So yeah, then it's a question of who is going to win a championship. And the other thing, I mean, you probably know better than me, because you know much more about Moto2 and Moto3. It does seem like there are a lot of Spaniards, certainly in Moto3 and Moto2. Fewer Italians, and beyond that, there's one or two.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the slightly concerning thing for Dorna is that you look at the Red Bull Rookies Cup from this year. And again, I think you've got Alvaro Carpe, Max Quiles, another Brian Uriarte, all really, really fast kids, all Spaniards coming up. And it's just this kind of endless conveyor belt of like lads that have been riding the European Talent Cup and then going up into Junior GP in the Red Bull Rookies. And there's no doubt about it that that kind of pathway is fantastic. And if you've been in that sort of Junior GP National Spanish Championship paddock for 5-6 years, then it's going to be a lot easier for you there than if you're like some kid coming over from America or Australia or England or who knows where else. So yeah, it's not just a Moto3, Dave, where the list of Spaniards is fantastic, or the kind of the level of the young Spaniards, but even the junior categories, there just always seems to be a fresh crop that are ready to step up.
And also, even amongst the riders who, the non-Spanish riders who are coming through, Colin Vieira's lived in Spain since I think he was 12 or 13. and it's paid off. He's had the right environment around him to be to really prove what he's capable of. If you look in the Red Bull rookies, people like Carson Thompson or Christian Daniel, their families moved over to Spain to be able to race in Spain, race in the various championships, and bringing over. So it's not just that there's lots of fast Spanish kids. It's also that the fast non-Spanish kids are coming out of Spain as well. One of our we in the Discord, we've also enjoyed the sort of the experiences of our patron Brian Deere and his kids, who his kids are out racing. They're sort of 9, 10, 11, I think, and those are the kids who are getting, they've moved over to Spain for exactly the same reason. You're in Spain because that's where the level of competition is high enough that if you want to stand a chance, if you think your kid has got the talent, and your kid really has the desire to go racing, you have to move to Spain and be racing in Spain or be racing in Italy. I think we saw Kaylee Yakov, who's the American girl who's ripping up US. I mean, she's been really, really strong in super sport in the US, and she's been over racing in the Italian CIV. So, in the end, you have to come here. Unfortunately, the talent isn't as equal. The talent and the opportunity isn't as equally distributed. So very good riders have to be in Spain to take the next step.
Okay, Dave, I think that brings us to the end of the questions from today. I think it's probably time to let you go back to whatever business you were doing on that lay-by before I started calling you.
I've been quietly getting hotter and hotter because I've been in the car, but I haven't been able to have the air conditioning on. So I'm sort of like slowly steaming like a clam.
Okay, right. Well, if you get outside to cool yourself down, just make sure you don't stick a thumb out or anything to any oncoming looking vehicles that may start to get ideas. But Dave, thanks very much for your time today, and thanks as well to your time as well. Whether you're watching us on YouTube or whether you're listening to us through whatever podcast application or device. Thanks very much for your company. As always, it's always a pleasure. If you're on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe to our channel, because we're putting out all of our we're putting out all of our podcasts now on YouTube. And thanks as well to our sponsors as well, KTM, Renthal Street, and Fly Racing. We could not do it without your help. So we're going to be back again next week. I think a well-deserved few days off, Dave, are in order.
Yes, heading up to the Italian lakes to look at large bodies of water and mountains, which is a very pleasant way to be spending time. I think we're going to be looking at large bodies of water falling out of the sky for a couple of days as well, but still, at least the scenery will be pretty.
And my plan is to have my first weekend at home in Barcelona since, I think, June, before Assen. So very much looking forward to that as well. So thanks very much, everyone. Remember to go over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast, sign up and become a member, sign up and become an annual Paddock Insider and pay for the annual fee, and you'll be entered into a draw to win 2 Paddock Passes to a round of your choice, starting from the Japanese Grand Prix onwards towards the end of the season. That competition will be running for another couple of weeks, and you could have the chance to purchase, or well, not just purchase, but to win 2 Paddock Passes, which are things that are not on sale from any kind of outlets. So unique opportunity to try and get that. Could be great if you're wanting to go to Phillip Island or Valencia per se. And we'll be back again next week with our show previewing Misano 2. So until then, goodbye.